and it happened to be the first, well, it's a mashup of World War I and II. Dalí and his wife Gala were actually living in the States for 8 years, from 1940 to 48, because they wanted to get out of Europe during World War II. So they were living in Virginia for a while, and then they made their way to New York. This is the first work that Dalí painted while he was here in exile from Europe. So he's, you know, he was very alarmed at World War II. So, but here he's like putting elements of the two wars. I have this new flashlight, it's not awesome. We have this Italian Putti angel over here in the corner covering her eyes so she doesn't see the horrors of the war unfolding in front of her. We have Dalí's self-portrait right there in the center. He got the idea for the self-portrait from this particular rock formation in Caracas where he spent his summers. So you can see the nose of the boulder is his nose as well. He's covered his mouth with ants here. He was definitely afraid of ants, so whenever you see those pop up in his paintings, it means he's trying to convey that he's afraid of something. Dalí tends to use the same symbols over and over. This crutch, which is propping up a cannon, symbolizes weakness and illness for Dalí. Dalí had a lot of that around him his entire life. His mom died when he was 17. He himself was sick. I'll tell you another story about a brother later on. So there's a lot of sickness, so he uses the crutch to convey that. So we have a damaged horse coming out of the cannon. So cannons were big in World War I, but not II. Biplanes, aviation was very central to World War II, but not I. He's got the Nike winged goddess of victory here, but she's all bandaged and destroyed. His self-portrait starts to morph into this ambiguous he-she figure with breasts. And it's clutching a cello that has no strings, and that's meant to convey that there's no beautiful music being made during World War II. So it's a super bleak painting, but it has two elements of positivity. One is these inkwells up here that Dalí hopes will be used to sign treaties to end the war. And then right there, the daddy long legs in the middle of the self-portrait. When Dalí unveiled this painting to American journalists, he said that, according to French peasant legend, if you see a daddy long legs in dust, you'll have to rock going forward.
It is absolutely necessary that a painter's hand be guided by an
They
angel.
spent the whopping
One
$1,250.
single beam has reached the
Then
plane
Mr.
of
Morse
light,
was asked by
whose
Dalí's
image is
agent at the
comparable
time if he
to
wanted
the
the frame
serene
to go along with it.
perfections
He
of the
said, sure, I'll take
Renaissance.
the frame.
And that
And then when
it
he got
happens
the
to be
invoice,
precisely
the work was
Gala,
$1,250 and the frame was
Gala,
$1,700.
Gala,
So
Gala,
I'll be making my own frame.
my wife.
One thing I wanted to point out about the wall plaques, because Dalí was born in 1904,
Designing
it's
my
attractive to
painting
work on all the
Dalí,
dates,
I
to know
give
how
my
old he
name to
was
an
when he
existential
made the work. That's
because
very important in
without
the
my
first
queen,
gallery,
I
it's
no
super
longer
young, it's
exist.
like 13, 14.
With Gala, I not only acquired the right to my own life, but the mile and female part of my genius. You will find Gala inside the permanent collection room.
Okay, so this gallery, Dalí, is only like 14 years old. It's painted a lot of these words. When he told his dad about his dad just said about everything he gained, all the keys, canvases, everything. And in Caracas, where they had their summer home, he goes into the studio. On the far wall back here, we have a self-portrait that Dalí did right before he entered school formally at the San Fernando Academy. It's in the style of chiaroscuro, which is very kind of Rembrandt-esque. It's very dark in the background, but there's something glowing in the foreground that draws your eye. He is trying to make himself look at what he thinks a cool art school guy would look like. So he borrowed a bunch of theater props from friends, like the hat, the pipe, the red scarf. He hadn't grown his famous mustache yet. That would happen later. But you know, he's just very affected in this painting. Another point about this work is that he painted it on burlap. In Caracas, where he spent his summers, it's a fishing village, and the fishermen would wrap their boats in wet burlap at the end of the day to kind of cool them down from baking in the sun. And Dalí just loved the texture of painting on burlap. It wasn't because he didn't have canvases, because he did, but he just liked the texture. By the time we get to this gallery, he's in school at the San Fernando Academy in Madrid, which was an all-boys school. But he got himself kicked out for like a year, almost immediately after arriving at school. He, for whatever reasons, was very upset with they needed to appoint a new chairman of the open-air painting department at the school. And that was a very important department because Impressionism was such an integral, part of the curriculum. An open-air painting department chair, that's an important spot. So for whatever reasons, Dalí was angry at the methods they were using. So he incited a little riot, and he got himself kicked out of school for an entire year, basically. So he was kicking around in Madrid. He spent a lot of time at the Prado. He started really diving into the Dutch masters, and that's reflected in these two still lifes here, which are very the Dutch masters spent a lot of time creating these elaborate still lifes. These are more kind of Spanish home life still lifes, but still he's trying that. Over here we have a really pretty kind of stab at Cubism. The palette is radically different from these two works over here. You've got those curvy olive trees juxtaposed against the blocky buildings in the background. Dalí had one sister, her name was Ana Maria, and she was his model and muse, so he's posed her in several different ways along the bottom of this work. And he sometimes would pepper his paintings with stuff that was happening in pop culture, and at the time that he painted this, it was the cool thing to do was to take a hot air balloon ride, so he slipped a hot air balloon into this work. So yeah, kids really love this painting, and you can see why. It's very kind of soothing and beautiful. Over here we have another work on burlap on that far wall. But for the most part, in this little gallery, it's still lifes and some impressionism, a little bit of This gallery has several important works in it, and it's just, a lot of them happen to be done the same year in 1926, which was a big, big year for Dalí. I mentioned that his mom died when he was 17. So it was the custom at the time in Spain, or in his section of Spain anyway, that if a woman died and she had an unmarried sister, the unmarried sister would sometimes step into the role of the mother who died. So that's what happened in Dalí's family. His aunt became his stepmother. But she was already kind of woven into the fabric of their lives because his mom had been sick. So it was a fairly easy transition for Dalí and his sister Ana Maria. I'm telling you all this because here she is, right there on the terrace of their summer home in Caracas. And it's clearly an impressionist work, but it's very sophisticated in its repetition of circles. Everything is very circular. The grapes, the glass, the pendant, the bowler hats, circles everywhere. Over here we have kind of a half-hearted attempt at Cubism. He just had to check it off his list, so he did that. This work over here actually started out very differently. It started out like this, just kind of a boring portrait of his sister Ana Maria. And then after Dalí, so in 26, Dalí's aunt took him to Paris for the first time, and let me back up a little bit. In Caracas, where they had their summer home, there was a family named the Pichots who were very musical and artsy, and one of the Pichots was friendly with Pablo Picasso, and so he brought Pablo to Caracas to hang out, so Dalí was able to meet Picasso at a really young age. There's 20 years approximately that separate Dalí and Picasso. So in 26, Dalí's aunt took him to Paris for the first time, and he was able to go to Picasso's studio and spend the whole afternoon there, and Picasso showed him all the works that he had in progress and talked to Dalí about his own budding career as a painter. I'm telling you all this because, it's that this work started out like this, but then after Dalí went to Paris, not immediately after returning, but you know, he came back and did the overpainting on the bottom, which is very, very Picasso-esque, the kind of oversized female proportions. Which leads me to this beauty right behind us, Femme Couchée. If you didn't know that that wasn't Picasso, you would think that it was. I mean, it's just such a dead ringer for a Picasso. Over here we have Basket of Red, which was another really important work for Dalí in 26. Again, it's in that technique of chiaroscuro, a dark background with something glowing in the foreground that captures your eye. This was the first work of Dalí's that was ever displayed in the US at the Carnegie Institute in 1928. It's rumored that he used up to 40 shades of gray and white to depict the tablecloth beneath the basket. It's just almost photographic. The level of detail is like really staggering. I mean, you can really see the texture of the bread if you get close. So Dalí had set a challenge for himself with this work. He's, you know, am I able to paint as well as my idol Jan Vermeer? And after he finished it and after everybody just went nuts about it, he was like, yeah, I nailed it, I can do that. So right behind us, we have Dalí's one and only attempt at cross-hatching. It was another technique that the students were supposed to learn. So he just did this one work and did it perfectly. And he said, I'm not really big on cross-hatching, so just check it off my list. Here we have two very different works that kind of nod to a motif that Dalí would use over and over again, and that is to turn the subject away from us. He only did that with women. You're not going to find men turned away from us in his works. I don't know what that is, but Dalí had a theory that people really valued mystery in art, so this is definitely one way of conveying mystery, because if the subject isn't looking at you, you have no idea what her emotions are, and you can't even really guess. The two works are radically different, and they're both painted in 1926, which was just such a big year for him. This first one is again in that technique of chiaroscuro. It's dark in the background, it's glowing in the foreground. Every single hair on her head is articulated here. I mean, it's just really staggering if you get up close to it. This work is very, very different. It's considered a precursor to surrealism. I don't know why, you know, specific reasons why it's not quite there yet, but it was considered super radical when Dalí unveiled it, super like sexy, like he got in a lot of trouble for this one. Dalí got the idea for this work from a stereoscope that one of his professors had when he was a little boy. A stereoscope is just a little box that you look into and you can see a scene, like a 3D scene. So there was, his professor had one of a little Russian blonde girl. So this is Dalí's grown-up sexy Kardashian version of the little girl trapped inside the stereoscope. You know, is she close to us or is she a giant? Like, we don't really know. But it was, he just got so much flack. I mean, even supposedly, like, the bare feet were, people were enraged by the bare feet. This is a work that was done much later in 1963. It's one of few works in the galleries in the whole museum that we actually purchased, and it wasn't bequeathed to us by the Morses. There's a jasmine painting up the road that I'll point out later that we just acquired. I don't know how much we paid for it, but and I don't know how much we paid for this either, but we bought it at auction at Christie's, I think, actually, I don't know. It's called Portrait of My Dead Brother, and it's a meditation on mortality. Dalí was actually born 9 months after a brother of his died. That little guy was only 22 months old when he died of a gastritis, a stomach ailment, but he too was named Salvador Dalí. So our Salvador Dalí, the famous painter, was considered essentially a replacement brother for the Salvador Dalí who died before he was born. So it's very central to his personality. He's very, very flamboyant personality. He always wanted to get people's attention. I mean, mostly he did that by becoming like, you know, one of the most important artists of all time. But he also was very eccentric in the way that he presented himself in public, crazy things that he would do, et cetera, et cetera. So we have a vulture popping out of the forehead here. We have all these cherries that morph into like chocolate-covered cherries, and at the bottom they morph into these Spanish conquistadors. Right there in the center we have the DNA molecule. Dalí was really obsessed with math and science, so he tried to slip in the DNA molecule wherever he could. Over here, the Spanish conquistadors they're stabbing at the memory of Dalí's dead brother. There starts to be this bloody ear situation over here on the left, and that's a nod to Vincent van Gogh, who we all know sliced his ear off. Apparently Vincent van Gogh had a brother named Vincent van Gogh who died before he was born, too, so both artists are considered replacement brothers for the brothers of the same name who died before they were born. I'm happy. This is our little mini anti-art gallery. It was just a small blip on Dalí's career, only a couple of years. Anti-art is exactly what the name conveys. It's just supposed to be like disturbing and gross, and there's all these decayed animals and body parts floating around. Like I think this is a toe, and she just, she's a bather on the beach, which is very grotesque. Dalí has collaged some rocks and gravel and sand from Caracas onto some of these works to kind of like pump up the texture. But they're just supposed to be just disturbing and strange. And they are. This work has a really long, annoying title, Gala Contemplating the Mediterranean Sea, which at 20 meters becomes the portrait of Abraham Lincoln, homage to Rothko. We docents just call it the Lincoln. Dalí got the idea for this work from the magazine Scientific American, which he loved. They had done a story on facial recognition. They didn't use the word pixels at that time, but that's pretty much what they were, like, that's what it was. Like, how many blocks of color does it take before you start to see a face pop out? So he has painted a miniaturized version of the Scientific American cover right there. He's painted himself into the work right there. Right here in the center, we have Gala, his wife. She's contemplating the Mediterranean Sea. This work is from '76. So Dalí was 72 when he painted it. Gala was 10 years older than he was, so she was 82 when he painted this. So this isn't actually Gala. It is a model standing in for Gala. Right here at the top, that intense burst of yellow, that's the top of Christ's head. Dalí always painted Christ the same way, as if he were floating above us, about to ascend up in heaven. You can see the knees underneath and the arms are outstretched. That block of blood red right there in the upper left corner, well, it's right the way we're looking at it, is the exact spot where Lincoln was shot in the head, evidently. So this was done in '76. It was supposed to be a birthday present to the US, because that's when we turned 200. I don't know if you guys remember the bicentennial. Yeah. I remember. Because Dalí really loved the States. He got good and rich here and famous, and he loved both of those things, fame and money. And also by this time in his life, he and Gala were carving their year into 3 locales. They would spend every fall in New York, because Dalí was having a major retrospective of his work every single year. Then they would spend the spring in Paris, and then they would spend the summer in Spain. So that's when he got the bulk of his work done. So Dalí, when they were in New York, they always stayed at the St. Regis Hotel, and they always stayed in the same suite at the St. Regis. He was really into like continuity. So he actually painted this in his suite at the St. Regis. And the way that he figured out how to do it, not only did he have like great friendships with mathematicians and scientists to help him figure out a lot of like how to grid out his works, but for this particular work, which he painted in, you know, it's such a massive canvas, but he painted in his hotel suite. I mean, I don't care how big the suite was, it's not that big. And we have pictures of him sitting down in a chair painting this. But the way that he figured out how to do it was he took a pair of binoculars and turned them around the opposite way that you typically use them. So the large part was against his eye and the small part was down here. So, in the title of the work is 20 meters, which is 60 feet. If we stood back 60 feet, you'd be able to see Lincoln pop out at you. Or if you took your phone right now and put it on camera mode, you'll also see Lincoln pop out at you.
Wow. Amazing. Oh. Is it like the augmented reality, or like is the real thing in the image? Like how?
No, I mean it's
How
just
come
paint.
like?
It's literally, I mean,
Wow.
you just figured it out. You're so smart. And if you were far back in the gallery, you'd be able to see it pop out too. It's very impressive, right?
Yeah.
This work over here is really beautiful and really special because it's one of Dalí's most famous favorite of his own works. So when you think of how many, you know, works of art he created, for him to say, "I really love this," it means a lot. So it's called The Meaning of Furniture Nutrition, and it's just a really like classic example of a surrealist painting in that there are elements of reality and unreality. Reality is these beautiful fishing boats on the beach. Unreality is his nanny Lucia with, you know, a chest of drawers cut out of her back. Out of that chest of drawers is a smaller chest of drawers with a tiny bottle of medicine on the top of it. So his wife nanny, so Dalí had a ton of nannies when he was growing up for a few different reasons. One, they just had the money to have nannies around all the time. And two, his mom was sick and he was sick, so there was always need to have like some extra care. And he was really mean to some of those nannies. We have really gross stories of stuff that he did to them. But he loved this one, Lucia, for whatever reason. So he wanted to like lovingly paint Lucia. But so she's in her nanny uniform, but she's also sitting on the beach mending a fishing net. So in Caracas, where he spent his summers, you would often see women on the beach mending fishing nets that their husbands used to catch fish. So he's kind of conflating, you know, the nanny with the fisherman's wife right here in this work. This is oil on panel, but it's so delicately done that it looks like watercolors. And remember a window cut out of her back, because another work up the road features a lot of windows cut out of backs. How much time do we have? Technically. Okay, let's go here, please. This is one of several masterworks that we own. The definition of a masterwork, according to Mr. Morse, is a work that measures at least 5 feet in at least one direction. Clearly, this is much bigger than that. And it also had to have taken up an entire year of Dalí's life in terms of coming up with the idea and then executing it. This work, The Discovery of America by Christopher Columbus, actually took 2 years, 58 and 59. And it's Dalí's version of Christopher Columbus. Dalí, like a lot of other Spanish people, thought that Christopher Columbus was one of them, that he was Spanish, that he was from Girona, Spain. You know, typically, if Americans think of Christopher Columbus, we think of a big, burly Italian guy, but Dalí wasn't buying that. He didn't think that that was the case. So he wanted to represent Columbus the way he thought he would look. So when he and Gala were in New York all the time, they would often eat at the Russian Tea Room, which is a famous restaurant in New York. So Dalí recruited a waiter from the Russian Tea Room to be his model. for this Christopher Columbus work. So he's here, then he's all throughout the canvas. Dalí's painted himself twice into this work. He's over here as a priest clutching a crucifix, and the crucifix again has Christ shown from that same perspective, flying over us. Dalí's also over here as a beggar with his coat pulled up over his head. We have Christ on the cross up there. I'm sorry, my flashlight is so lame. We have Christ on the cross up there, and you can see his arms are outstretched and his head is facing us. In this work, Gala has a major role. She's Mary at the time of the Immaculate Conception.